Aloha. Thank you for watching the Fontaine Factor this evening. My name is Representative George Fontaine, and tonight we have an exciting show talking about prisons, incarceration, and law enforcement in general, and specifically we're talking about the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. Tonight I have two very special guests. One is a leading expert in this particular initiative that's here from the Council and State Government, as well as we also have Mr. Ted Sakai, who's the Director of Public Safety. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And to his left is Andrew Barbee. As I mentioned, he's from the Council of State Government's Justice Center. And was actually here for the bill signing recently for some, I guess, two bills that became law that were signed by the governor to help get this initiative going forward. So for the viewers out there who don't know what in the heck is the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, maybe you could give us a bird's eye view from maybe 30,000 feet, and then we can start getting into some of the specifics, Andrew.
Certainly. Justice reinvestment really is a process. It's about using data and information from the correctional system, for example, here in Hawaii, in conjunction with stakeholder input. So we talk to law enforcement officials, prosecutors, prison administrators, parole administrators. And it's really a top-to-bottom research process to understand what's driving the correctional system's growth. We were asked to come to the state of Hawaii by leadership from both chambers in the legislature, from Speaker Say and President Tsutsui, the governor, and the Chief Justice, to come and look at Hawaii's system and see if we could not identify perhaps some ways to improve public safety by reducing recidivism, the rate at which people return to prison in the correctional system, while at the same time better spending Hawaii's precious dollars.
Now, you actually work for the Council of State Governments, is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And for the viewers in the audience, what is exactly that organization? What does it do?
So the Council of State Governments, we've actually been around for many decades. We're a national group. We're a membership organization that is dedicated to serving state and local government officials who are elected by their constituents. We serve all three branches of government, and we work to provide technical assistance and expertise on a range of issues. And the Justice Center is really the crime and public safety arm of the Council of State Governments.
Okay. Now, this organization, is it partisan, a nonpartisan organization?
We're a nonpartisan organization. We're a nonprofit organization. For the Justice Reinvestment process, we receive funding from the Bureau of Justice Assistance through the United States Department of Justice, as well as the Pew Center on the state. But we are a nonpartisan group. We do not advocate certain policies. We exist to support and help states implement evidence-based practices with respect to public safety and their criminal justice systems.
Okay, so this initiative is not new. It's not like leadership suddenly had this idea or read it in a magazine or a book. Obviously, they got information from other states about where this is being implemented and saw that there were some very positive results. Ted, would you say that that's pretty much the case, that it was looked at in a wider view of like, how can we do this better?
That's my understanding. My understanding is that the Council of State Governments has done this in other states with some measure of success. I think I wasn't here at the time. I just started on this job in June 1, but it is my understanding that our state leadership was simply seeking a better way because we have some serious challenges facing our correctional system, which really consumes a lot of dollars.
Okay. If we can, I'd like to put up a few slides here just to kind of give some background to this. Maybe Andrew or Ted, feel free to jump in at this point. But this over here, this first slide, shows that what the trends in Hawaii are. So as you can see, it ranks 35th among the states in violent crime, but we have a pretty high property crime rate. We're like 12th in the nation. And maybe you can speak to this, Andrew, or either Ted, about what this forecasting does.
Yeah, so ideally states' correctional systems as they make presentations to their legislatures every year to make sure that the adequate resources are available, ideally we'll have a process for informing the legislature what the future growth of the prison population will be. As various state agencies try to plan for the future, it's important to know what future demands will be that will need their resources. Hawaii, unfortunately, has suffered some of the same budget constraints that all other states have, and over the years have had to identify certain areas to cut the budget, and some of the research capacities with the Department of Public Safety were some of those resources that were cut over time. What that ended up resulting in was a loss of the capacity for projecting into the future the number of people that they would have incarcerated, therefore the prison capacity that they would need to be able to sustain. And so that makes planning very difficult. It makes conveying to the legislature what their needs will be equally difficult.
Okay. So as a part of this initiative, is that something that the initiative tries to tackle in terms of putting that back online?
Absolutely. The word reinvestment, with the name Justice Reinvestment, is all about putting resources back into the system to preserve public safety, reduce recidivism, and in the case of Hawaii, to reinvest in the infrastructure of the Department of Public Safety. And some of those reinvestments, the legislature in its wisdom saw fit to make sure that the department indeed had that research capacity, so that as they communicate to the legislature in the future, it's not only about planning and forecasting, but it's also about identifying the outcomes.
Sure. Okay, looking at the slides again, if we could, the forecasting also showed in 2007 that 36 out of 50 states used this type of simulation. So I guess we're just now catching up with what the majority of the country is doing in terms of coming up with this type of modeling capability. And let's take a look at some of the justice trends in Hawaii. I think this is kind of interesting. 1/3 of our prison population, I didn't realize it was this high, is housed in out-of-state facilities on the mainland. Although we've seen a decline in the recidivism, it's still up there. I mean, we've seen the decline of 12%, but from what I understand, we could be doing a lot better, and that this will help with that.
That's right. There has been progress made here in Hawaii, but it is still a relatively high recidivism rate, above 50%. Many states see the recidivism rates 40% or lower, in fact. Some states are higher than Hawaii, but 51% is not really what you would want to see. And the state is seeking to improve that rate and constantly putting resources in place to do that.
Okay, so basically the initiative is a three-part plan, if we can show that slide so folks can see what that is. And Andrew, okay, so we talked about analyzing data, developing the policy options, and then putting in reinvestment strategies into place, and then measure it, which is about, I guess, the modeling that you're talking about, looking at where we're going, whether it needs to be tweaked or it needs to go in some other direction or whatever.
That's right. And so with the signing of the legislative package yesterday by the governor, you could say that kind of concluded that first step of analyzing the data, identifying a policy framework to improve the situation. And so now we're moving into the phase where we assist the state through technical assistance and actually implementing the policies that were identified. And in addition to the implementation assistance, it's equally important to measure whether or not the objectives of the policies are actually being achieved. And so that's where we're going to continue to help the state to measure and identify the outcomes.
Let me interject here, just as a real practical example of how this can help us. One of the findings that the council had was that there are a large number of inmates sitting in our prisons who have actually passed their parole dates, but they're still in there. And the reason they're in there is they're not getting the programs they need. That the system is saying, you got to have this in order to get parole, and they were not providing it. So through this process, we're going to start to identify what are these programs. For example, do they need substance abuse treatment? Do they need more parenting? Do they need job placement? And not only that, when do they need them? So that when they actually get to the parole date, they're more ready for parole. They're more ready for successful parole because some of these needs have been met.
Well, I think one of the things that, and it's great that you jumped in there with that, because I was just going to ask you what are the challenges are going to be in terms, and what are the steps that the Department of Public Safety is going to have to do and implement that. But I think there's this misperception that by moving this initiative forward, that all this is doing is releasing prisoners early out of jail and freeing up bed space. But if you really look under the covers of this, it's really not that. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is we have folks that go into prison and they're given an option. Okay, you can go and have drug treatment, or you can go and get your high school diploma, or whatever you want to do. But if you don't want to do that, you don't have to, and you can serve your time and you can leave. And these folks are leaving, and there's no supervision. And I think that was one of the things that really got misunderstood, I think, by some lawmakers and some others in the public, that this was some kind of early release.
Right. I think that one of the things that really jumped out for me when I read the report is that we're holding inmates much longer than we need to, and we're releasing them less ready than they should be to retake their places in society. So if we do it smarter based on the data that we're going to be developing, we can get them out at the time the parole board says to get them out, and they'll be more ready to be successful in the community. They'll be less likely to recidivate.
Now, getting all of these programs together is going to cost money. It's going to take manpower to do that. How are you going to manage all of that and getting this thing rolling?
If we can get people out, if we can get them out at the parole date, for example, instead of staying a year or a year and a half, 2 years past that, we can start freeing up bed space. You know, in the right way, not simply to release, but release them in a more rational, thoughtful manner. That will allow us to start reducing our reliance on prisons like the one in Arizona, which will allow us to reduce the cost of sending inmates out of state. And so what the legislature did, what you folks did, Representative, was allow us to start taking some of that savings that we will generate in the future and applying that for these kinds of programs that we talked about.
Okay.
I guess that's what the reinvestment is all about.
Hence the word, right?
Yes.
Folks, if you're joining us right now, this is the Fontaine Factor, and tonight we're talking about the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. I have two great guests on this evening. We have Ted Sakai, who's the new head of public safety, and we also have Andrew Barbee, who is from the Council of State Governments, who is here in the state of Hawaii and is one of the consultants, I believe, that actually worked on doing the evaluation and developing the Justice Reinvestment Initiative here in Hawaii. So again, thank you, folks, and thank you for joining us if you're just joining us now. So what do you see, Andrew, as being some of the challenges? I mean, we've got these two bills. Why don't we talk about maybe what the two bills are and what specifically, since they were just signed recently, you want to share maybe some of the specifics and what those challenges will be on what you perceive as the challenges?
Certainly, Representative. And I do real quickly want to touch base on, you had talked about some of the misperceptions that had existed during the session about what the legislation did or did not do. No aspect of the legislation reduced the maximum amount of time that a person may spend behind bars, for example. None of the legislation prevented certain people from being sentenced to prison. None of the legislation removed discretion from the parole board. There's a component of the legislation that requires the Department of Public Safety to do a basic assessment of a person's risk of flight or risk of rearrest, so that the courts, when making the decision that they make about whether or not to allow someone out while awaiting disposition of their case, that they have the information, but it doesn't force the hand of the courts. So no components of this legislation forces the hands of the courts or of the parole board. There are some caps on how we respond to the first instance of violating terms of parole for a technical reason, but it does not fundamentally reduce the amount of time they could ultimately spend behind bars. There's three basic areas of the Justice Reinvestment Package. The first deals with pretrial detention. The state of Hawaii has some of the longest times in pretrial detention that we see across the United States. And a lot of that had to do simply with a very reactive process for identifying whether or not someone was a suitable candidate for release, sharing that information with the courts so that the courts could then make a decision. So what the legislation does in this respect is it puts in place a process for the public safety department to have a proactive process, meaning they won't wait for someone to ask for the information. They'll begin gathering it as soon as these people are booked into their facilities, so that when the court needs to make those decisions, as they will still be the ones making them, they'll have that information available instead of having to wait on it.
Well, and I think, that was the argument, is that, oh, how are you going to be able to do this? I think it's a 3-day window that it has to be provided.
Yes.
And then how are you going to have the resources to be able to do this in 3 days? And I think that was one of the arguments too. And it took a lot of different shapes when it first came in and what was finally came out of conference and what was ultimately signed. I remember one part which was removed was to raise the amount for felony theft from $300 to $750. And there was a lot of debate about that, whether or not, are we really keeping up with, what $300 was back when the law was first created versus what $300 is today, and whether we're incarcerating people, for felony theft, whereas in other jurisdictions it would be considered a misdemeanor. But there was a lot of outcry that came from the Merchants Association about that, and saying, you're going to hurt us because we get these guys come in and they shoplift and they do it repeatedly. But I think the thing about it is, what it did for me to get my arms around it, was to take a look at it in its totality. Because if you pick this apart piece by piece, some of it doesn't make sense. But when you look at it, when it looks into the whole big picture of how we're treating these individuals, I know from my personal experience in law enforcement, I was a detective for a number of years before I moved up the ranks to become captain, and I was very frustrated by recidivism. And it always seemed like it was the same group of people that were committing the most amount of crimes. They would go on these crime sprees, and they would go in, they would get locked up for a set amount of time, and then they'd be released, and out they'd go out and start stealing again, breaking into cars. So this is going to help, I believe. This is going to hopefully provide more supervision. Is that correct, Ted?
Yes, it will. One of the things we're going to start looking at is who are these people that we're dealing with who are sitting in the jail? Why aren't the courts releasing them? For example, it is my understanding that many pretrial defendants are not released because they simply don't have an address. They're homeless. So our response needs to be, how can we help the courts to create the supports in the community? So instead of sitting in jail, which, as we all know, is a very expensive proposition and contributes greatly to overcrowding, can we create a program or develop something outside so the courts can sentence, can release to an outside program instead of keeping them in jail?
Well, I think that's going to be critical in you folks developing public-private partnerships with various nonprofits that would be able to. Okay, so if a man or a woman is homeless and the courts don't feel comfortable in releasing him because they feel like he's going to skip,
that's right.
How do we now get that person into a shelter? And a place where that person could be managed, either in a halfway house. And are those resources available?
At this point, I can't say yes or no, but I do know that we cannot do it ourselves. We're going to have to develop these partnerships. We're going to need the community agencies and the general community to partner with us in order so that we can develop these partners. We're not talking about serious violent criminals. We're talking about people who get in trouble because they have some low-level mental health concerns, or they simply are down and out and they don't have a home, and
they shoplift.
That's right, and
trespass. And
sometimes, the police officer on the beat doesn't know what else to do. So, bang, to court, to jail, and stay in jail. So these are the kinds of people that we're talking about. We really need to address so we can reserve the beds we have for the real serious offenders.
Well, speaking of that in terms of the police, a lot of times it really isn't in the officer's hands in making that discretionary call. I mean, if he rolls on at Macy's for shoplifting, and even if it's a non-felony, well, if it's a felony, the person's going to get arrested because that's policy. You're not going to release on your own recognizance or pending further investigation. There's going to be an initial arrest. He could later be RPI'd, or arrest pending investigation or indictment later on, and that is the call of the detective at that point, or he can go through the preliminary hearing process. But like on a shoplifting case, a lot of these stores have zero tolerance. So like if you shoplift from Macy's, and I don't know if Macy's has this policy or not, but I'm just using, you know, that store, particular store, it's a well-known store here in Hawaii. And if they have a policy to saying, you shoplift in our store, we are going to file charges and we will have you arrested. And they do a citizen's arrest. The officer doesn't make the arrest. Usually it's the store security guard who makes it. So he then receives the arrested person and then takes him to the station. So that's the other thing. I mean, we need to look at the whole thing in terms of not only that, but be building more public awareness in terms of policies that are occurring not only within the state government, but what's happening in the private world in terms of policies of how we're going to deal with certain types of crimes and individuals and how that's going to be able to incorporate into the public safety.
Absolutely, and you know, I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you about this, because this helps us get the message across as to what we're trying to do, what we must do in order to really enhance public safety. That's what we're talking about.
So how are you going to get this dialogue going? I mean, are you going to go out into the neighborhoods or on the street, or I mean, how are you going to get this whole action team together? Who's going to coordinate this, and what's the game plan?
Well, the first thing we need to do, and we've started doing that, is I want to make sure that the staff here in the Department of Public Safety really has its arms around issues like what is a validated risk assessment instrument that we're going to be required to do. What does it take? What are we trying to measure? What are our needs? And then we're going to have a lot of dialogue. I intend to have a lot of dialogue with community agencies, starting with the nonprofit providers and the rest of the general public. It's going to be a work in progress. It's not going to be done overnight, but we have to be very purposeful as to how we approach this.
So if you need help with this, and somebody who's watching this show says, hey, you guys are doing a really good thing, I want to step up and help out the state get this program implemented, how would they do that?
They can contact me, and you know, I'd love to leverage the support that they have, because if I can get one person to help us carry this dialogue into the community, we can get the message out threefold or fivefold.
Good. Andrew,
yes, sir.
Now you've done this before, or this whole program has been done in other states. Mm-hmm. Why don't you tell us a little bit of some of the success stories that you've personally seen, and how long did it take, and that kind of thing?
Certainly. So the Justice Reinvestment process really began in 2006. The state of Kansas was our first state. Since that point in time, there have been 15 or 16 other states, 16 now including Hawaii, with the passage yesterday, that have adopted the same process. Mm-hmm. In Kansas, for example, where this started, they had parole revocations that had been spiking and really contributing to a spiraling, growing prison population. What they put in place were some treatment incentives so that prisoners who were about to enter parole would be incentivized to participate in programs designed to reduce recidivism. Since that point in time, the state of Kansas has seen their parole revocations cut in half.
Wow.
Similar results have been seen in Texas, a southern, very conservative state, a state that does not like to consider itself soft on crime by any means, where they've instituted increased funding for programs. They put more swift and certain sanctions in place, but sanctions that were also more measured. In other words, if it was a technical violation, allowing them to be sent back to prison, but for a limited amount of time, so that they get the message in a swift and certain way, so that they don't spend the next 2 and 3 years in prison because they failed a drug test. States such as North Carolina, New Hampshire, many different states of many stripes have put in place these kinds of policies and seen tremendous results in terms of reduced recidivism rates, all while maintaining declining crime rates, declining arrests. So these reductions in their prison populations and these savings, they haven't been gained at the expense of public safety. In all of these states, the public safety has been maintained, and we've seen their crime rates and their arrest rates continue to decline while also seeing savings. And that's through more effective supervision, better targeting of the very scarce resources, getting away from a one-size-fits-all approach to dealing with criminal behavior.
We've got just a little over a minute left. Anything you want to comment on in terms of where you see this initiative going in the future in our country? I mean, we've taken these important first steps within our states, but where do you see it going from here on out?
Well, what we're seeing around the country is states recognizing that the time of treating all criminal offenders with kind of the one-size-fits-all approach, trail them, nail them, and jail them, for example, does not work. That depending upon the nature of the criminal behavior and the risk that they present, you need a more targeted and nuanced approach to how you address those criminal behaviors. And so states around the country are recognizing this. They're seeing the success of other states, and they want to make sure that they adopt these same evidence-based practices to move their systems forward.
Well, I wish you all the success, Mr. Sakai, all the success to you as well, too, with your program. I think we need to turn the corner with crime, drug problems, all of the issues that are happening in our society which generate crime need to be addressed, and we need to do it in a smart way. And it sounds like you two gentlemen are launching the ship on that. So I really appreciate your efforts in coming here to Hawaii and helping us, and you, Mr. Sakai, for your stepping up June 1st as the new public safety director and going to lead our state into better times, I hope. Anyway, folks, thank you for watching. You've been watching The Fontaine Factor. If any of you would like to reach Mr. Sakai, again, he's the director of public safety. Andrew, I think, is going to be leaving soon to go back to his home state. But if you have any questions or comments or concerns about tonight's show or any of the shows, please write to me at repfontaine@capital.hawaii.gov. That's repfontaine@hawaii.capital.gov. Thank you again for watching.